All right, welcome back to the Elias Macko Show. Joe Adam George joins us on the program now. He's Canada Research Lead for Islamist Threats with the Middle East Forum. They're based in the U.S. He's also a foreign policy and national security analyst with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute in Ottawa. He has been covering Islamist extremism in the West and terror financing for quite some time. Joe Adam George, welcome to the program.
Hi, good morning, Elias.
It's
Thanks
great
for having me.
It's great to talk to you once again. Now, there is a new report that is out that is raising debate in Canada over the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood in this country. And I know, like, for myself and for a lot of people listening, that might be surprising to hear that the Muslim Brotherhood has influence in this country. Joe, why don't you start us off here and tell our listeners why this report is alarming for you?
It's certainly a report that should concern Canadians, both from a national security and from a social cohesion perspective, simply because of how this group operates. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood, unlike their more violent contemporaries like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they do not resort to guns and bombs and knives to promote their agenda. They go about covertly influencing and transforming, Western societies and even Arab monarchies who they find as un-Islamic, in the hope that they would one day create an Islamic caliphate that would resemble the medieval caliphate or the Ottoman Empire that collapsed right after the Second World War. Now, as the report had pointed out, the challenge with trying to target a group like the Muslim Brotherhood is because it operates in a very decentralized manner. So most of their members, it's very hard to pinpoint who their members are because of simply how they operate. And even if you're not a card-carrying member of the organization, you can simply, if you're ideologically aligned to their goals, that's enough. So what you do essentially do to promote their agenda is you could create charities, run schools and hospitals, and promote Islamism under the guise of being a religious body, and which is what makes it even more challenging because they use the cover of Islam to promote a radical ideology of Islamism to take over the West, and which is why our Western governments have struggled to date to bring down this group because there is simply no way in identifying who these people really are. And even if they do not want to go after them because they're afraid of Islamophobia and also being accused of racism and so on.
And now, Joe, I have to ask you if there's any connections here to the protests that we've seen in this country now for almost 2 years. Over the weekend here in Montreal, there was a bike race that was targeted. There was an Israeli team competing in the bike race. So protesters over the weekend targeted the hotel where the cyclists were sleeping at. They targeted the race itself. Yesterday, we saw the tennis matches that were happening this weekend in Halifax get targeted. They didn't have spectators. There were no spectators. Canada versus Israel at the Davis Cup because of that. Are there any links there?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Elias. There certainly is. In fact, what you're seeing happening across the country, in addition to the protests that you talked about, the 488% increase in terrorism charges of the last 1 year, the 670% increase in anti-Semitism, the public prayers that's happening in Montreal over the last few months. All of these are symptoms of how deeply rooted the Muslim Brotherhood operations are in the country. And which is why. So now if you try and go after these people, they're using the Palestinian cause. It's a perfect foil for these people to push their agenda because if you try to target them, they'll accuse you of being anti-Palestinian or of being an Islamophobe. And which is precisely, as I pointed out earlier, Western governments do not want to tackle this problem. But you're now seeing that change. Jordan earlier this year designated them as a terrorist group. Of course, most of the Arab states like Saudi Arabia, UAE had already designated them. The U.S. is actively working as we speak on designating them as a terrorist group. So you can expect that to happen sometime next year.
So what would be the way to combat this growing influence? You mentioned why governments are so hesitant to do so. Well, what should we be doing?
You can't simply designate a group like the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist entity, Elias. We aren't talking about ISIS and Al-Qaeda or Sami Doon. Like I mentioned before, they operate in a very decentralized manner, and so it's very hard to put a pin on what their operations are specifically. So rather than have a top-down approach, you need to look at a bottom-up approach, which would mean you need to identify who the front groups are, which would mean you need to go after the charities, hospitals, schools, any so-called religious entities that are funneling money that is pushing Islamist ideology in the country. And you go after and you designate them as terrorist groups and the people involved. So this is the only way you can try and bring down a group like the Muslim Brotherhood.
Now, you've mentioned, as we've started off talking about Canada here, but you've broadened this out and saying this is affecting all Western countries. Is there anything that we've learned from our peer nations or other Western democracies, whether it's reports out in those countries or ways that they are trying to combat this in other countries? Anything we should be taking away from our peer Western nations?
That's a great point, Elias. I mean, the French government had leaked there was a leaked French government report earlier this year in May, which talked extensively about how the Muslim Brotherhood is looking not to just take over France, but also entire Europe and the Western world, and how they're going about it, how this group operates in a very duplicitous manner, meaning, they pretend they're people, the ideologues pretend to be very progressive in public, but in private, they are amongst the most hateful people you can imagine. They have anti-women, anti-LGBT, anti-Western views. But when you're out in public engaging with the government or on any other public fora, they pretend to be amongst the most progressive people, and they align with any bad actors that can further their agenda, which in this case, with the pro-Palestinian protests, you're seeing them engage with the far left in pushing their ideologies. So the French government report was an example. We have learned the Americans have come out with a number of reports in the past. The British government did one back in 2015. So there is a lot for us to learn from our Western allies in tackling this threat. But personally, given the political environment we live in Canada and what we are seeing with all the anti-Semitism and violence on the streets, I am not too confident if the government is prepared to tackle the Muslim Brotherhood threat.
Joe, unfortunately, we have to leave it there. Come back again on the program. I think this is a topic that should have some further discussion. So we'll talk again soon, okay?
Thank you, Elias.
That's Joe Adam George there from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute in Ottawa. He's also the Canada Research Lead for Islamist Threats with the Middle East Forum.